The first time the rancher saw her, she was standing barefoot in the dust, clutching a ragged shawl and staring at his house like it held her fate. The prairie wind moved through the wheat, the sky wide and white-hot, and somewhere far off, a hawk cried out like it knew what was coming. "Mr. Callan," her father said, his voice dry as the land itself, "I hear you want a wife. My daughter's perfect for you." It wasn't a proposal, it was a trade. Callan Brigg didn't answer right away. He just looked at her. She was young, maybe 19, with a softness to her that didn't belong to this country. Dust streaked her cheek and the sun lit the tremor in her hand. Her name, he would soon learn, was Evelyn Hart, and she was not perfect for anyone. Not yet. But before all that, before the long days and the silence that would grow between them like a fence nobody crossed, there was this moment, a father desperate, a rancher alone, and a girl whose eyes looked past both men, out toward the hills where she'd never again be free. 3 days earlier, Colin had been in town, drinking his coffee black and his silence darker. Folks had begun to talk about him again. The rancher with the empty house. The one whose wife died birthing a stillborn. The man who don't smile no more. He let them talk. They always did. That morning, Mr. Hart had sat across from him at the diner. A small-time farmer with too many mouths to feed, a failing crop, and a daughter people said was too proud to marry the boys around town. She read books by candlelight, sang to the horses, and turned down every proposal she got. Hart leaned forward over the table. "You got land. She's got hands that can work and a heart that'll learn." Callan just stared at his cup, steam rising between them like a ghost. "Think it over," the man said, standing. "Ain't much good left for a woman alone out here. She deserves better than dust and hunger." Now here they were, the farmer and his daughter standing at the edge of Callan's land. The barn behind him smelled of horses and memory. The field stretched golden and lonely, and Evelyn's eyes, wide, steady, frightened, said everything her father didn't. "Come inside," Callan finally said. The girl hesitated. Her father gave her a small push and she stepped past the threshold of the house, the boards creaking beneath her bare feet. Inside, the air was cooler, the light thin and tired. A single picture hung above the mantel, a woman with kind eyes holding a newborn. Dust covered the frame. Callan poured 3 cups of coffee. Only 2 were touched. Hart's voice was steady but hollow. "You'll take care of her, Mr. Brigg? She's a good girl, quiet, knows her chores. She won't trouble you none." Callan studied the man's weathered hands, the tremble in them. Poverty had a way of making even decency look cruel. He looked at Evelyn again, her fingers wrapped around her shawl, her jaw trembling just enough to betray her. "I'll take care of her," he said at last. Hart stood, relief and guilt sharing the same sigh. "Then it's done." He placed his hat over his chest. "You'll be good to her. That's all I ask." When he walked out into the fading light, Evelyn didn't follow him. She stood there like a ghost, staring at the closed door. The silence that filled the house after her father left was deep and living, the kind that stays even when you try to speak. Later that night, Colin found her sitting on the porch steps, knees pulled up to her chest, watching the stars crawl slow across the sky. "You'll get cold," he said. She didn't look at him. "I'm used to it." He stood there a long while before sitting down beside her. The crickets filled the space between them. "You didn't want this," he said quietly. She turned then, and for the first time, he saw the truth in her eyes, a flicker of defiance under the fear. "Want's got nothing to do with it, Mr. Brigg. Out here, we just endure." The words hung in the air, heavy as the scent of rain coming over the plains. He wanted to tell her that he didn't ask for this either, that he'd buried love once and had no wish to dig it back up. But he stayed quiet, because some things in the West weren't spoken, they were just carried. And in that silence, something began. Not love, not yet, but the faint stirring of 2 lonely souls bound by circumstance and dust. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, and Evelyn didn't flinch. She just whispered, almost to herself, "Guess I'm home now." By the second week, the house had grown quieter than the grave. Callan spoke little, ate less, and worked from dawn to dark as if the fences and cattle could keep his ghosts away. Evelyn moved through the place like a shadow, sweeping, cooking, fetching water, never looking him in the eye longer than a second. The marriage had been sealed by words, not hearts. No preacher, no dress, no music, just a desperate father, a lonely man, and a bargain made in the dust. But out here, bargains didn't stay buried for long. One afternoon, the horizon began to shift, not with storm clouds, but with riders. Dust rose from the south, and by the time Callan reached the gate, he could make out 3 figures on horseback, heading straight for the ranch. "Don't be scared," he said, though his hand hovered near the rifle leaning against the porch. When the riders stopped, the lead man dismounted, Deputy Warren Hale, a tall lawman with a scar across his jaw and a tone that always carried more judgment than the badge itself. "Afternoon, Brig," he called out. "Heard you took on new company." His eyes slid toward the door where Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway. "Her name's Evelyn," Callan said flatly. "My wife." The deputy's brow lifted. "Your wife? That farmer girl? Folks in town said she ran off with some drifter weeks back." "She didn't run," Callan said. "Her father brought her." "Brought her," Warren repeated, the corner of his mouth twisting. "Ain't that something?" He leaned closer. "You sure about that story, Brig?" "Town says old man Hart's been near mad with grief. Claims his daughter was taken." Evelyn's breath caught. "That's not true," she said, her voice breaking the spell of silence. He sold me." The deputy turned his gaze on her, slow and sharp. "Sold you?" The words hung in the dry air like the creak of a gallows rope. By nightfall, the riders were gone, but the damage wasn't. Rumors traveled faster than wind through wheat. Next morning, Colin rode into town to find half the men staring, the other half whispering. When he walked into the general store, Mrs. Lyle, the shopkeeper's wife, pulled her daughter closer and didn't meet his eyes. He bought salt, tobacco, and coffee, all without a word. But when he turned to leave, an old rancher near the door muttered, "Buying women now, Brig." The whisper turned to laughter. The laughter turned to noise, and Callan's jaw tightened. But he said nothing. He walked out slow, climbed onto his horse, and rode back through the dust. That night, Evelyn met him at the gate, her hands red from scrubbing clothes. "They know, don't they?" "They think they do," he answered. "I didn't mean to cause you shame," she whispered. "I didn't ask to come here." He looked at her, really looked, at the fear, the guilt, the faint pride that refused to die no matter how harsh the wind blew. "You didn't," he said, "and I won't let 'em treat you like you did." A week later, the deputy returned, not with questions, but with an order. "Town council says she can't stay here," Warren said, sitting stiff in his saddle. "They don't want the trouble. Say she's owed a proper hearing." Callan stepped forward, his voice quiet but cold. "A hearing for what crime?" "Being what she is," the deputy said, eyes flicking toward Evelyn. "A girl sold off without consent. Some folks call that unlawful. Others call it shameful. Either way, it ain't something we just ignore." Evelyn stood behind Callan, her fingers gripping the porch post. "If I go, where do I go?" she asked softly. Warren hesitated, just a blink, but it was there. "There's a boarding house in Abilene. Maybe a churchwoman'll take you in. You'll have a roof, food." "She stays," Callan said, cutting him off. The deputy's expression hardened. "You defy the council, Brig, and they'll make it official. You'll be called harboring." "Then let 'em," he said. For a moment only the cicadas spoke. Then Warren pulled his reins and turned the horse around. "You always were stubborn," he muttered. "But you're playing with fire, Callan. That girl's past is going to burn you both." When he rode away, the dust took its time settling. That night, Evelyn stood in the doorway of Callan's room, her face pale in the lamplight. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "I wasn't about to let him decide your life. But they'll come back." He nodded once. "Then I'll be ready." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "You're the first man who ever asked what I wanted." Her words hit him harder than any bullet. And though no vows were spoken that night, something began to shift, not in law, but in loyalty. Outside, thunder rolled low across the plains. Trouble was coming. The next few days carried the kind of quiet that never lasted long in the West. The air felt different, tense, dry, waiting. Even the horses seemed restless, stomping in the barn before dawn, ears twitching at distant sounds. Callan had lived through drought, fire, and death. He knew when a storm was coming, the kind that had nothing to do with weather. On the fourth morning, a dust cloud rose from the south again. This time not 3 riders, closer to 10. Evelyn saw it first from the porch. "It's them again," she whispered. Callan stepped out beside her, the sun glinting off the rifle in his hand. "No," he said quietly. "This ain't the law." As the riders drew near, the marks on their coats told the story. The Hart brothers. Evelyn's kin. Her father's sons. The men who'd stayed silent when their sister was sold, and now came to reclaim what they called theirs. The lead rider spat into the dirt as he reined in. "You must be the man that bought our sister." Callan didn't flinch. "No man can buy what don't belong to be sold." The brother sneered. "Pretty words. But you think that changes what folks in town are saying? You think you can keep her like some saint after taking her like a sinner?" Evelyn stepped forward then, trembling but steady in her voice. "You had your chance to speak, Caleb. You stood there when Pa made the deal. You watched and said nothing." Caleb's hand went to his belt. "And I've been paying for that silence ever since. But I ain't here to talk, Evie. I'm here to take you home before this man drags our name through the mud any deeper." "I am home," she said, her voice breaking just a little. That was when the brother's smile died. "Then you've chosen." He turned to Callan. "You got till sundown to let her pack. After that we come back and it won't be for talking." When the riders left, the silence that followed felt heavier than gunmetal. Callan holstered his rifle and walked to the barn, slow and deliberate. Evelyn followed him. "You can't fight them all," she said. "Didn't say I would." He checked the rifle's chamber, the slow click echoing like a heartbeat. "But I won't hand you over either. They're my brothers," she said softly. "They'll kill you if you make them choose between pride and blood." He met her eyes, pale blue against the storm dark of hers. "Then they'll have to live with what they did." Evelyn turned away, tears gathering like storm water she refused to let fall. "You think honor can fix this? Out here, honor just gets men buried." He didn't answer. The wind carried the dry rattle of grass, the call of a crow overhead, and somewhere far away the sound of hooves, a promise of what was coming. By sundown, Callan had the place ready. He moved with the calm of a man who'd already accepted the worst. The barn door was barred, lamps doused, horses penned quiet. He left one rifle inside, another on the porch. The sky burned orange, then bruised to purple, then to the black that meant the Hart brothers were almost here. Evelyn came out of the house wearing the same worn shawl she'd arrived in weeks ago. "You can still ride," she said. "If you leave now, they'll follow me, not you." "You think I'd let that happen?" he asked. "You think that's who I am?" "I don't know who you are," she said, voice shaking. "All I know is every man I've met made choices that hurt somebody else. Don't be one of them." He looked at her a long while, then softer than before. "Maybe I've done enough hurtin' in my life. Maybe tonight's about stopping that." She turned away, wiping her eyes. "You don't owe me anything." "That's where you're wrong," he said. "You're under my roof. That makes you my responsibility. And maybe more than that." The sound came then, hooves again, closer this time, like thunder crawling up the earth. 10 shadows moving across the field, lanterns swinging from their saddles, rifles strapped to their sides. The glow painted the land in flickers of orange and black, the night breathing around it like a living thing. Evelyn stood beside Callan on the porch, her hands clasped tight. "They're here." He nodded, eyes steady. "Go inside. Lock the door." "No," she whispered. "I won't hide again." He turned toward her, meaning to argue, but her face stopped him. The fear was there, yes, but behind it something stronger, something that made him believe she'd already lost too much to run again. The first shout came from the darkness. "Callan Brigg! You know what we came for?" He didn't answer. He just stepped off the porch, boots crunching slow on the dirt. The lantern light caught the edge of his rifle. "Then come take her," he said. The brothers spread out, fanning through the dark, rifles lifting like hungry hands. And in that moment, the plains held its breath. The night had chosen sides, and it wasn't over land, or law, or blood. It was over a woman who'd never asked to be saved, and a man who'd finally decided to try. The first shot never came. For all the fire burning in their voices, the Hart brothers hesitated. 10 men against 1 should have been over in a heartbeat. But the quiet that wrapped the ranch was thick, sacred almost, as if the land itself demanded they think before spilling blood on it. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her face ghost pale under the lamplight. The shawl around her shoulders trembled with her breath. She could see her brother's outlines through the dark, shapes she'd known all her life, and for the first time, she saw how small they looked against the vastness of the plains. Callan stood between her and them, tall, still, unshaken. The wind toyed with the edge of his coat. His rifle stayed low, but his voice carried clear across the silence. You men want to take her back, fine, but not as a thing, not as property. She goes only if she says so. A rough laugh broke the stillness. Caleb spat into the dirt. You talk about choice like it means something out here. Ain't no woman got a say in what happens when a man's name's at stake. Then maybe your names ain't worth much, Callan said softly. That drew movement. The scrape of boots, the cock of a rifle. Evelyn's heart hammered, but she stepped forward anyway. Stop, she cried out, her voice cracking through the air like a whip. If you came here to fight, then you're no better than the man who sold me. Caleb's head snapped toward her. You watch your mouth, girl. I watched long enough, she shouted back. I watched Pa trade me like livestock because his pride couldn't stand our hunger. I watched you all turn away while I begged him not to. You did not come here for family. You came to bury your shame. The men shifted, uneasy. Even the horses snorted and pawed at the ground. Callan lowered his rifle slightly, eyes fixed on her. It wasn't courage he saw. It was something deeper, something older. The kind of strength that came from surviving what others couldn't bear to remember. Caleb's voice broke through again, but quieter this time. You think he cares about you, Evie? You think this man's any different? Look at him. You're just another thing he's trying to fix. Evelyn shook her head. He never asked me to be anything. He let me be. Her eyes found Callan's, steady and full of tears that refused to fall. That's more mercy than I've ever known. The wind picked up then, long, low, mournful, as if the earth itself exhaled. Caleb dismounted slowly, boots crunching over dry earth. He looked older than she remembered. The anger had aged him more than years ever could. He stopped 10 feet from Callan, face caught in the half-light. You don't understand, Brig. Out here, we can't afford the kind of softness you're preaching. Women get taken, men die, and land gets lost. You start making choices with your heart, you end up buried under it. Callan's eyes narrowed. Maybe that's true, but I'd rather be buried honest than live as a coward. The words hit Caleb hard. He looked down, jaw tight. The other brothers exchanged glances. This wasn't how they'd imagined it going. Evelyn stepped between them, bare feet silent on the dust. You all think this land only grows crops and graves. But it grows us too, what we choose to be. For a long while, no one spoke. The lamps flickered, the night breathed, and the standoff turned into something smaller, sadder. Then Caleb did something no one expected. He dropped his gun. The others hesitated, then followed. The sound of rifles hitting the ground was like rain breaking a drought. He looked at his sister and said, barely above a whisper, You really think you can build something new with him? Evelyn nodded, voice soft but sure. I don't know what I can build, but I know I'll never find peace living under someone else's mercy again. Caleb took a step back, the hardness in his eyes giving way to exhaustion. Then maybe you ain't the little girl I remember. I stopped being her the night he sold me, she said. He turned to his men. Mount up. The riders left without another word. Their silhouettes faded into the dark until only the night remained. Evelyn stood there, trembling, every part of her still waiting for something, a shout, a shot, the breaking of peace, but it never came. Callan lowered his rifle completely, exhaling like a man who'd forgotten how. You shouldn't have stood out here, he said quietly. Could have got yourself killed. She looked at him, eyes glistening. You think I was going to let you face him alone? He almost smiled, but stopped himself. You talk like you've been fighting your whole life. Maybe I have. For the first time she reached out, her hand brushing his sleeve, light as wind. He didn't move away. The touch wasn't romance. It was something older. Understanding, gratitude. maybe even forgiveness. The night around them was still, save for the faraway roll of thunder and the rustle of wheat. And when she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "Thank you for letting me choose." He looked at her then, and in that moment the ghosts between them began to quiet. Dawn came quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like grace after a storm. The prairie shimmered silver in the early light, dew glinting on every blade of grass. The land, for once, seemed at peace. Callan was already outside feeding the horses. He moved slower than usual, not from age but from the weight of what hadn't happened. The gunfire that never came, the blood that never spilled. Sometimes mercy left a man more hollow than violence ever could. From the porch, Evelyn watched him. Her shawl was gone, replaced by a work shirt rolled at the sleeves. Her hair, unbraided, fell loose down her back, catching the first light of morning. She looked more like herself than she ever had before, or maybe she was just becoming someone new. When he noticed her watching, he wiped his hands on his coat and nodded toward the corral. "Horse needs shoeing," he said. "I could use another pair of hands." She smiled faintly. "I don't know a thing about horses." He looked at her, one corner of his mouth twitching. "You learn fast." They worked side by side in the slow rhythm of the morning, the kind of labor that doesn't need words. Dust rose soft beneath their boots, and the smell of hay mixed with the faint sweetness of the nearby creek. For a time, it almost felt like they were the only two souls left on earth. Then, without looking up, Evelyn said, "You think they'll come back?" Colin didn't answer right away. He set the hammer down, straightened, and looked out toward the open land. "Maybe. But if they do, they'll come different next time." She nodded, understanding what he meant. Not with anger, but with reckoning. "Caleb," she said quietly. "He wasn't always like that. He used to sneak me bread when Pa wasn't looking. Used to say I'd see the ocean one day." Callan leaned on the fence, the wood creaking under his arm. Men change when hunger sets in. Pride's just another way of staying fed. She studied him. "And you? You still hungry, Mr. Brigg?" He turned to her then, really seeing her. The resilience in her eyes, the quiet ache that no one had ever cared to soothe. "Not the same way," he said. "Used to think work in the land would fill what I lost. Then I thought silence might. But maybe what a man needs ain't always his to find alone." Evelyn looked away, her throat tight. "I don't know if I can ever be what a wife is supposed to be." "Then don't be," he said. "Just be you. That'll be enough." The simplicity of it undid her. For the first time since she'd stepped on his porch, she let herself breathe. Really breathe. Later that afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon. Not a group this time. Just one. Evelyn saw him first and stiffened. "It's Caleb," she said. Callan nodded once. "Stay here." When Caleb dismounted, his hat in his hands, the dust clung to his face like guilt. He looked thinner, older somehow. "I ain't here for fightin'," he said. "Came to say Pa's dead." Evelyn's breath hitched. "When?" "Yesterday. Fever took him." For a moment, no one spoke. The wind sighed through the corral, and the earth felt too big for words. He said your name," Caleb added quietly. "Said maybe he was wrong." Evelyn turned away, tears cutting slow tracks down her cheeks. Colin stepped closer but didn't touch her. He knew some griefs had to walk their own path. After a long silence, Caleb looked at Callan. "You treated her better than we did. Guess that's what I needed to see with my own eyes." "She's safe here," Callan said simply. "I can tell." Caleb turned to his horse. "You take care, Evie. You found yourself a good man. That's more than most get." She managed a small, trembling smile. "Goodbye, Caleb." When he rode off, she stood there until the dust faded into sky. Only then did she whisper, "Goodbye, Pa," and let the last tear fall. That evening, the sky turned gold, then pink, then the color of ashes. The two of them sat on the porch again, like that first night, but the silence was different now. Not heavy, not cold, just there. Evelyn rested her hands in her lap. "When I first came here," she said, "I thought this house was a prison. Now it feels like a beginning." Callan looked out across the fields, the wheat rippling like waves beneath the dying sun. "That's the thing about the West," he said quietly. It don't care who you were yesterday, only what you're willing to build tomorrow. She smiled at that. Small, soft, and full of something she hadn't dared feel in a long time. Hope. As the last light slipped beneath the horizon, she leaned her head gently against his shoulder. He didn't move away. No vows were spoken. No words were needed. Out there on the edge of nowhere, two broken lives had found a kind of peace no preacher could bless and no lawman could take away. And when the wind came whispering through the tall grass, carrying the scent of rain and rebirth, it sounded almost like the land itself was forgiving them both.